Welcome back to DWP 2022 season. I trust that you had a great break. We are back with the last set of series for the season. Today our topic is cultural intelligence and metaphysical phenomena as the fountain of deep knowledge creation for Africans. We are, as always, going to start by emphasizing the point of the theme of the year: whoever controls Africa runs the world. And the only thing you have to remember for this year, and for you to spread the word across Africa and the world, is that Africa will be the next economic superpower after China and the USA. I mean, at DWP this whole season, all we have done, actually in the first few months, we spent many sessions and several topics just to emphasize the point and give you the data and evidence that Africa will be the largest economy in this world, latest by 2060. But more importantly, I would say that there are two major conclusions from the work we have done this season so far. The first is that we have to remember that Africa will be the dominant cultural group in this world by the middle of the century. Why? Because 1 in every 5 are human beings. And by the end of the century, 2 in every 5 human beings will be Africans. So it will be increasingly an Afrocentric world. Whichever way you want to look at it, Africa and African culture and belief systems will dominate the way consciousness develops in people's minds around their beliefs and the belief system as a whole. The second is what I've already alluded to, that even at mediocre economic growth rates of, say, 6% per annum, Africa will still be the largest economy between 2050 and 2060. We also gave you a lot of data and evidence on that. And let me just remind you that one of the most important things you have to remember on that point is that between 2000 and around 2011, 2012, Africa had the highest economic growth rates in the world. Africa was achieving anything up to 6% growth rate. Based on exports of raw materials alone, Africa was only contributing 1% to 1.5% production in the world. So imagine Africa being able to accelerate the pace in which we are investing in our agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution has to be based on small family farms because those are the majority of Africans on the continent. And that's the only way we can industrialize our economies whilst uplifting the rest of the people. In other words, as soon as we see small family farms, incomes rising, and their production is channeled into manufacturing through proper processes of aggregation and mass processing at local levels, not just in the cities, then mass consumption of manufactured goods will raise standards of living locally, domestically, not through exports. That's even before we talk about exports. And Africa will be growing at higher than 6% growth rates. So those are the two pieces of facts that we covered in the previous sessions, just to emphasize the point that Africa will be the next economic superpower after China and the US, and will be the dominant cultural group. The challenge we have, therefore, is that we don't seem to be focused on this point. We are still sleepwalking into this greatness. We are still busy firefighting, copying and pasting, begging here and there. Our main instrument to unite Africa and to be able to have integrated economies that can grow even faster. The Africa Union is still a kind of a project mainly funded by the same former colonizers who would rather see us continue to be producers of their raw materials, whilst they sell to us finished manufactured goods at much higher costs than we export raw materials. So that for the background. Today, as we come back from the mid-season break, I prepared for you the key principles that we have put together over the last maybe 4 or 5 sessions, where we focused on culture and identity and why that is important for Africa's knowledge systems. And as we pushed that through and spoke about African branding, we spoke about epistemology or knowledge development systems for Africans, we discussed how even the science is lagging behind some basic traditional understanding of how actually the environment works, how creation happens, because the advent of quantum mechanics has made it clear that science does have limitations in understanding cosmology and creation. So we cover these principles because as Africa moves towards an industrial economic giant, we have emphasized before the fact that we need to do this on the basis of a number of important principles. Otherwise, we're going to industrialize and end up in similar unsustainable decay that we've seen other industrialized nations go into. As soon as we come back from a small break, go through the principles with you. Thank you. So welcome back from that short break. Now I would like to go through these key principles with you. Number 1, industrialization and economic transformation is one cultural transformation journey. Industrialization is not a technical process. Maybe manufacturing, which is just part of industrialization, is the technical part. But industrialization as a whole is the mass transformation of the cultural basis of any society. So as manufacturing takes over the cities and large proportions of the population move to urban areas because there are being jobs created by the manufacturing factories, that is the process that makes it possible to have the mass production of raw materials and mass processing and mass consumption of those materials. That's the manufacturing part. The industrialization concept that I would like us to remember is it goes beyond the technical aspects. It goes to all other aspects of society. All aspects of society then transform. The way the family functions, the way the community is organized and deals with its community issues, whether it is provision of services or whatever. The legal systems transform because shift from focus on family and community issues, the legal system migrates much more into commercial issues and trade issues, and the legal systems therefore also impact both negatively and positively on the family and community laws, because the traditional laws start having to mutate around issues such as inheritance and so on and so forth. And we've seen in Africa how we fail to grasp this, and we just copy and paste the laws, and we are not cognizant of the fact that we are not a really industrialized society yet. The majority of the people are still not. So you simply cannot copy and paste laws from industrialized nations and expect that your family law will jive with commercial law, etc. So we have to distinguish manufacturing, which is the more technical process, from industrialization, which then includes services and social elements, and basically grasps the key point that even the educational system is now industrialized. Instead of learning and being mentored at home, you're just like you're in a classroom. It's good as being in a factory. health system is industrialized. Instead of people being healed at home and prevention being more important, now you go to a hospital where they don't worry about prevention, really. They just try to cure diseases in a factory. A hospital is a factory. A church is a factory. A school is a factory. So that's how industrialization of society can destabilize otherwise very stable cultures. The second thing I'd like to cover, the second principle, is that civilization itself is not universal truth. The human race has gone through countless forms of civilization, and different groups will conjure up and come up with advancements which are accepted as civilization. But it doesn't mean to say that that becomes universal truth. Civilization is often very cultural specific and context specific. And you can say civilization is simply a kind of mass agreement or mass assimilation of similar beliefs. Then you can say we are civilization to the extent that we are all agreed in these aspects of social and economic behavior belief system. So the idea of transplanting foreign cultural ideas and hoping that they constitute civilization in another society is what has led us to continue to suffer the residual effects of colonization. And as Africans, we even argue about, colonization was long over, so why are we worried about it? No. That's not the point. The point is that the impact and the residual effect of it is what we focus on. Okay, it's not about reversing history. We are not here on this earth to reverse history. No, we make new history, but how do we make new history? Oh, let's just look across the ponds and see how others have dealt with it. And I think the striking case is the Jews. I mean, the Jews were persecuted by the Germans, and they were in diaspora world over, even when they started migrating to other parts of the world, including finally to the US, where they made it big. They were still discriminated against. But the Jews never forgot the persecution. Today, if there is any living general of Hitler's or anyone who can still be associated with the persecution of the Jews 60 years ago, 70 years ago, they will be pursued. So Africans, we don't have to revenge, but we cannot forget. We cannot forgive and forget without realizing that the means, including intellectual means, of moving forward, go back to rediscovering much more directly who we are, what values drove us, and how do we use those to reconstruct our society, and not allow the negative aspects of colonization and slavery to continue to stand in the way. The third issue, like I said before, is that in this broad knowledge systems dialogue that we are having, it's important to remember that the majority are not always wrong. Majority are only right in politics and in the church and in the educational system. But we know in reality that quite often the majority are wrong. And if you're a serious intellectual and you're a seriously spiritual person, you should be prepared to stand out against the masses, because you could be seeing something that other people don't see. You see, this is the history of the world. Civilization can only progress when courageous, bold, and serious intellectuals, philosophers, actors, thinkers are prepared to stand out. So the idea that the majority are always right has to be looked at carefully. It must be rather debate and rational disputation on issues is the way a society progresses. Not that the majority is always right. Sometimes they are right, quite often they are wrong. Fourth point is that the mass awakening of most people in the world, especially Africans, is in itself a shift in consciousness that there is not one or two or three or four options for how society civilizes. The possibilities and options for civilization are limitless. There should not be any culture that can tell another culture, this is right, this is wrong. You can only civilize this way. You can only industrialize your society this way. You can only develop this way. Absolute nonsense. Possibilities for progress are limitless. This is the way the Creator put this universe together. So, principle number 5 is about coexistence of the different cultures in the world, because part of the problem in dealing with after effects of slavery and colonization is that how do we reconstruct a world where coexistence is actually the norm? And I know that we have all sorts of efforts to do this with the United Nations at the apex, but it's very clear that even the United Nations, or the great work they have done, they have reached their limits. They are not able to pull together a code of conduct of nations which promotes the mutual coexistence of different cultures and systems. So that has to be recreated somehow. And the coexistence of civilizations, if we take the African approach, the Hunu approach or Ubuntu, Udugu approach, is that all civilizations and all cultures have to abide by 3 mutualities. First is mutual respect across cultures, across peoples, and then secondly, mutual benefit, so that we may go different ways, we may seek different things in life, but at the end of the day, at a collective level of coexistence, we have to come back and ensure that there are some primary elements of mutual benefit that take a priority, such as the environment. We all breathe the same air in the end, and all the trees and all the land belongs to the collective. Finally is the element of mutual responsibility or mutual accountability. Once again, the world has gone amok. There are some cultures which don't want to be responsible in terms of coming together with others to coexist. They are holier than thou, or they think they are better than others. And yet, mutual responsibility calls for all civilizations, all cultures, all countries, all nations to be able to periodically come together and agree that certain aspects of life can only succeed when we all agree that we are collectively responsible. Principle number 6 is what we touched on in one of the sessions, which basically then says that as Africa industrializes, it definitely has to understand that there are impacts on African values and belief systems, and that Africa still has time to understand that we can't just copy and paste the processes that Europe, United States, China, Japan have gone through to industrialize their nations, because now we know that we have to consciously understand that societal values can still be maintained as we industrialize. But if you don't focus on that and assume it's just a mechanical, automatic process, we will see the collapse of especially the most important African values around family and family systems, community, and how people coexist and form strong relationships. That can die under the name of industrialization. 7, a principle is the questioning of the dominance of the Western style scientific thinking and science, as is argued, the only legitimate way of creating knowledge and applying it. It is important for Africans to know that Western science, or the scientific method as it has been applied, has been fantastic in producing some fairly impressive technologies over time, but has been disastrous in its inability to provide findings and research outputs that improve the general conduct of humanity. So we have seen how Western science can easily produce massive advancement, say, in mechanical engineering and manufacturing processes, whilst at the same time increasing the extent to which people are enslaved or abused. So this inability of science to fully comprehend life is something that Africans have to be fully cognizant of and look at, especially other knowledge systems, other belief systems. And that's why in future we will be talking more, not just about how quantum physics has changed the way we think and look at things, but how African metaphysical belief systems contain a lot of valuable insights into how humanity functions. And we will be doing a session on that. When it comes to the next principle, we touched on African epistemology and how pre-colonially it was way ahead of its time. I mean, Africans were on their way. They were developing in certain ways which were destabilized. In fact, both the metaphysical aspect of African belief systems was brutalized and demonized through the colonial system, to the extent that it was almost frozen in time. It didn't die. Fortunately, the colonial experiment failed to kill African knowledge systems completely. And a lot of it is to do with the inability of Western knowledge systems to completely transform African lives and lead us towards a path which makes us Europeans or Chinese or Americans. That failed to happen. We thank our ancestors and our Creator for that. We have a lot of room to rebuild our civilization. Principle number 9 is that we would like to marry the progressive elements of Western epistemology and thinking, especially in the areas of science. The Eurocentric or Western approach is a lot more to do with separating researchers from the reality that they work in and go and experiment. So there's a lot of linearity, disjunction, and discontinuity. We break things apart and then hopefully bring them back together again and then figure out inventions and a way forward. But Africans, on the other hand, as we can gain a lot of value from that, what we have lost and we should regain back is that historically, African ways of creating knowledge were centered around reflecting on reality as a whole, not in bits and pieces. So that holism is an acceptance that by just touching one part of the system, you never know fully what other parts of other systems are invoked. And so and for that reason, whatever you touch in this universe created by the Creator, there's uncertainty and it's a probabilistic world rather than a deterministic world. That, to me, represents the strongest aspect in African philosophy, way of thinking, way of creating knowledge, way of living in this world. In other words, I am prepared to say the Africans were always right to believe that the real world is actually the spiritual world. the physical world is just a creation of the invisible spiritual world. Number 10, it's a principle that comes through and was emphasized and highlighted and surfaced much more strongly by COVID-19 pandemic, where contemporary Africans all of a sudden woke up. A wake-up call was heard finally that, my goodness, just one simple virus makes it so difficult to figure out how we're going to survive. Even the industrialized nations of this world were struggling to survive. We didn't know where we were going to go to. Big governments, Germany, United States, United Kingdom, with the best health system in the world, collapsing. So wake-up call for the Africans that there is no universal epistemological foundation that can answer all future challenges. And therefore, we should not be abandoning our historical knowledge systems that go beyond laboratory sciences and so on. In other words, that awakening, that call that was highlighted by COVID-19 pandemic reminds us Africans that there are limitless solutions out there, which we just have to continue seeking through immersing and engaging the environment and being able to forever use the intellect as our tool to engage this world. So I think that's pretty important. It should open up Africans to be less skeptical, to fear less. Africans should just deplete this fear of African metaphysical phenomena and being able to figure out how to harness this energy for ourselves. So in conclusion, maybe the final principle is therefore that all problems are simply an absence of higher thought, not the presence of evil. And it doesn't matter how angry we are with our shortcomings or what the experiences we've had through slavery and colonization. At the end of the day, these are problems that can be transmuted so easily through higher thinking, and that our Creator has created us to be able to overcome challenges. It's part of the experience. Problems are the pleasure. Life is just a game. And all these hurdles provide opportunities to experience life, explore it, and enjoy it, rather than demonize a life the way religion and education and politics have limited our understanding of life and our appreciation of the gift of life. And as somebody said, I can't remember who it is, we are here for a good time, not for a long time. And I think Africans always knew that and always lived their lives on that dictate. So thank you very much. Those are the principles I want to leave on the table before I come back with some analysis and conclusions. Thank you. So welcome back to this conclusion. And as I said earlier, as we talk about African knowledge systems, and we started off with African identity, cultural identity as intelligence, and how African epistemology has to be rebuilt back because it's got a broader base for creating new knowledge and more experiences for Africans. We concluded that Africans immerse themselves in life, immerse themselves in the environment. That's the way they discover the relationships with all the phenomena. And that, therefore, as we will want to dig further, and we encourage you to do for yourselves, that African metaphysical phenomena, in the way we understand it, or try to understand it, because you can never fully understand phenomena, is quite important in the way we are going to craft development in future. The Africans, we can conclude, before slavery and colonization, were on their way, developing in their own ways and developing at their own pace. I mean, some of the work I'm currently doing in Zimbabwe, looking at my own ancestry, it's amazing. These people were not just wealthy, but they were able to create wealth locally. The industrial processes were happening locally. They were able to forge metals. They were beginning to make guns. They would make hoes. They could manufacture different elements that are used in agricultural production, mining. They used to mine and smelt gold, all locally. Industrialization was part of society, not something that was happening over there in the cities only. So that pace of integrated development was already there when it was destabilized, and we can recreate it so that, once again, industrialization is not a further destabilization of society. In conclusion, again, I would say that Africans always had a deep understanding of life. They did not have a highly deterministic or mechanistic approach to life. Africans always knew life is a game created by a supreme being, whoever that is. We're just part of it. We are not separate from it. And that our purpose in life is we are here for a good time, not for a long time. And in that sense, Africans placed a lot of emphasis on relationships and well-being. But we can also conclude that even after the brutalization and demonization of African thinking, African epistemology, even the way we mythologize and we try to grasp metaphysical phenomena, most of that has been lost in Africa, but it's not completely gone. There's been a wake-up call, and as I said, COVID-19 pandemic was a brilliant wake-up call. Africans now know that they don't have to drop their ways of thinking. They don't have to drop their ways of using all manner of ways of trying to figure out life and the environment around us. So use of intuition, gut feel, because everything is connected and is linked. Science is not the absolute solution to Africa's problems. We can use it as a tool to help us, but definitely on the spiritual and the intellectual side, Africans can bring a lot more in support of science to advance knowledge development in a way and at a pace not seen in other civilizations. So, once again, just to remind you, as I say goodbye, that whoever controls Africa runs this world, and that Africans, whether we like it or not, are going to be a dominant economy and the dominant cultural force well before the end of this century. And we better just wake up and do a better job of preparing for it. And then no better way of preparing than intellectual and spiritual growth to be able to go beyond the limitations brought to us by our previous challenges and contemporary challenges, and take the opportunity to lead the world back into a more humane world where coexistence, mutual respect, mutual benefit, and mutual responsibility of all cultures and peoples become the blueprint for uniting nations and humankind. Thank you so much. See you again in the next session. So my name is Mandi Rukuni. I authored this book, Being African, which I'm recommending to you. You stand a chance of winning a copy of this book in the DWP competitions. But I wrote this book primarily because we Africans often confuse Westernization with modernization. So this book goes through what it takes for us to modernize Africa using our heritage rather than Westernizing it. So Wunu, Botu, Ubuntu, Udugu is what this book is about. I recommend it to you highly, and those who want the practical side of how to succeed using heritage values, you can go to the small handbook of African Pathways to Success. Look forward to you participating in the competition. Thank you.
Stand a chance to win a copy of the book, Being African, or the booklet, African Pathways to Success, by subscribing to our YouTube channel, Dialogue with Prof Mandi Rukuni, and leaving a comment on one of our recent videos. You can also like our Facebook page and comment on a recent post. If you're on Instagram, follow the profile Prof Mandi Rukuni and leave a comment on a recent post as well. A random participant will be chosen at the end of the month and will be contacted and given the book.